Well, thanks for coming. Long ago, intelligent people believed that the Earth rested on the back of a giant turtle. And today, intelligent people believe that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. And I disagree with both groups. And tonight I'm going to give you the evidence for my saying that.
An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr., and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living color, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance, in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason prior to the mission, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. Furthermore, it is apparent they are in genuine zero gravity aboard the actual spacecraft, necessary to convince the mass media of their authenticity, just not any further than Earth orbit, as you will see. In this never-before-seen or heard footage, not only is the radio conversation between the astronauts and Houston Control audible, there is a secondary, private conversation taking place between the crew and a third confidential party, prompting the astronauts with what to say, when to speak, and how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired misleading effect. NASA claims that the Houston transmissions were the only ones taking place with the astronauts. Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass, and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with talk. Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Okay, Roger. We're nothing in on Earth.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we're seeing. Thank you very much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window, and there isn't any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from entering through the other windows. Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
I hate when that happens.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it. If they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it? Why this trickery with the window? By faking being halfway to the moon, it becomes apparent that they did so because they could not even go halfway. It thus confirms that the stumbling block to their success was the lethal radiation of the Van Allen radiation belts. Since the same equipment was used on the subsequent missions in the 40 months that followed, none of them could have gone to the moon. They only increased their proficiency at staging them.
Our second example is from Apollo 11 on their way to the moon, when the craft is allegedly 130,000 miles away from the Earth. This anomalous sequence was also found by a fellow TV producer and Apollo researcher, Bart Sibrel. We're all familiar with the way X-ray pictures are clipped up for examination against the light box. Well, what I'm about to show you is a sequence with a large colour transparency of the Earth clipped up against the window. If I put white behind it, you can see that more clearly. And when it's clipped up against the window, it becomes illuminated by the light of the sun behind it.
Okay, Level, we have a picture. We see the Earth right in the center of the screen, over.
The astronauts are assured that F-22 is the correct exposure.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out. And we'll zoom our camera in slowly.
Here is what appears to be the Apollo 11 crew's view of the Earth across the blackness of space.
Roger.
But why would the choice be made to take this all-important first view of Earth from 130,000 miles out by standing well back, away from the window?
Could you describe what you're looking at, over? Roger, you're seeing Earth as we see it at our left-hand window, just a little more than a half Earth.
During the sequence, after the camera has zoomed in, surprisingly, something comes between the camera and the Earth, partly obscuring the view. Obviously, this could not happen if they were shooting directly out of the window. It would not then be possible for anything to get midway between the camera and the Earth.
Central America. South America becomes invisible just off beyond the terminator or inside the shadow.
And now in this wider view, there's also an interior light in the shot. How can that possibly happen? Well, in fact, all that we've just been looking at was televised live from the craft. But the camera was not looking out through the window at all. Had they been filming the real Earth from a position back from the window, it would be difficult to keep the subject well framed, as you can see from this illustration. The Earth in the far distance would be cut off by the window in the foreground when any movement of the camera occurred. We've ringed the edge of the window white for clarity. Remember, it was handheld. And if they had been filming the real Earth when zoomed in, the edge of the window would not be sharp. It would be out of focus like this and spoil the shot, because the focus would have been set at infinity. Far better to have gone right up to the window and filmed from there.
And floodlight on.
Returning to the sequence where we left off, when the lights have been switched on, the other window shade opened and the exposure adjusted, we can see astronaut Mike Collins. The left-hand window we've just been looking at is now overexposed, but as we get closer, we can see that something is indeed clipped in front of the window. Is it that window-size colour transparency of the Earth, with the sunlight glowing white behind it? It looks very much so. Why would they need to be videoing a picture of the Earth?
Maybe a bigger f-stop might help.
Continuing with the shot, we panned around past Armstrong, who is in the centre of frame, across to the right-hand side of the capsule. And here, would you believe, through the right-hand window is what appears to be the real Earth filling the view. From the Apollo 11 command module, the CSM, we're being shown two different views of Earth, but both cannot be correct. Given that the first version is purporting to be over halfway to the Moon, and on closer examination is seen to be a colour transparency, we have to conclude that this image is not a true representation of the CSM's position. However, the time recorder reads out a mission elapsed time of 34 hours and 16 minutes.
34 hours, 16 minutes, and 15 seconds. Roger. Can you see that clearly enough, Charlie?
Where could they be? Well, as the second view of Earth fills the craft's window, we must conclude that they're in the relative safety of low Earth orbit, and not on their way to the Moon at all. That would then explain why they were videoing a picture of the distant Earth. Here again is Apollo 11. This time it's Armstrong and Aldrin standing together. But their two shadows grow to completely different lengths. The nearer one of them moves towards the light source, the longer their shadow becomes. Such an effect has nothing to do with their relative heights and everything to do with moving to and from a superlight. Remember, the landing site was supposed to have been on flat terrain, the Sea of Tranquility. Consider carefully the difference in lengths of these two shadows. Coming back to shadow anomalies, here is an example of a Mongolian herdsman, photographed with the light behind him. And of course, if a photographer is exposing for this scene, he or she knows perfectly well that without the use of fill-in flash or other lighting near the camera, there's going to be a result that looks more like a silhouette. Now look at this picture of an astronaut spacesuit, which was taken in a studio. The prime or key light is from the right, the upper area of the picture, and the area by the shoulder, here on the left, is much darker. So parts of the subject have been filled in with light in order to give us more detail. And indeed this fill-in light is square in shape and has been reflected by the visor. We propose that this technique of using extra fill-in light was applied when certain Apollo close-ups were created. Here we have the Sun, allegedly the only lighting source available to all lunar photographers, directly behind the astronaut and directly behind the rover. And remembering our example of the Mongolian herdsman, with no extra lighting and no atmosphere to help diffuse the light and fill in the subject, we must expect the authentic lunar surface picture to look like this, with both the astronaut and the rover in silhouette. Yet in this NASA moon photograph, as published, we can see detail on the shadow side of the astronaut. To say this once more, such detail can only be revealed by the use of an additional light source. So we have to conclude that secondary lighting was used to create these alleged lunar surface pictures.
Were any lights used in the lunar surface photographs?
No. They had no extra light sources brought with them.
We're reliably informed, to emphasize this point again, that no extra lighting was taken to the moon. We've taken the TV coverage and intercut the relevant still pictures.
Okay, your bliss looks like it's clear and okay. The toes are about to come over the sill.
This is the first of a sequence of photographs of Aldrin descending the ladder, taken by Neil Armstrong during Apollo 11.
Now drop your bliss down. There you go, you're clear.
A number of sources, as well as the many reference books on the subject, emphasize that the shadow side of the lem was in total darkness, and this fact is also confirmed by the TV coverage itself. You could call it designer gloom in comparison with the still photos. In this still picture sequence, Aldrin is apparently lit. In other words, an artificial light source has turned what would otherwise have been unusable, gloomy pictures into images of virtual studio-like quality.
Visibility, as we've said before, is not too great. Okay, I'm on the top step and I can look down over the RCU and landing gear pad. Okay, I'm going to leave that 1 foot up there and both hands down about the 4th rung up.
So here we have Aldrin, descending the ladder in total shadow. But we have evidence of the use of artificial lighting in the still photos of the event, because we can see that lighting is hitting part of the porch, the backpack, part of Aldrin's spacesuit. And most notably, it is hitting the heel protector of his right boot. It is obvious to anyone who understands photography that secondary lighting was used in this image. Reflectivity of the lunar surface, incidentally, is so low that it doesn't even manage to illuminate the rocks on the surface near to the ground. So we cannot accept the argument that the astronauts are beautifully lit even into the porch area of the lem due to lunar surface reflectivity.
So, wherever the Aldrin descending the ladder sequence of stills was taken, an artificial source of light was deployed.
I know that they had no extra lightning, no flashes or things like that. So it has to be the reflection from the surface.
That the astronaut will be adequately lit whilst in the shadow side of the LEM solely from natural light or earthshine bouncing off the lunar surface is an argument advanced by others as well as Jan Lundberg, but it's untenable. To make a direct comparison, the surface of the Moon on average has the ability to reflect light from any source whatsoever at whatever distance from its surface to the same degree as asphalt does on Earth, on average approximately 7%. In other words, whatever the strength of the light arriving on the lunar surface, whether by natural or other means, the ability of the average lunar surface to reflect light remains constant. Indeed, the lunar surface luminosity is so low it doesn't even manage to illuminate the shadow side of the smallest rocks, as we've already seen. Here's another good example. The sun, or prime light source, is behind the LEM. This picture is taken into the light, so the side of the craft nearest to us should be absolutely black, but has been filled in with a generous amount of light. Particularly obvious is this piece of equipment illuminated from the front.
I'll be honest with you, I think that's pseudo-scientific, nitpicky claptrap. And again, I don't know why we should spend even a moment trying to judge that.
But as we've seen, there are indeed crucial problems with the photographs. This is the point. The so-described nitpicky, pseudo-scientific claptrap is not pseudo at all. The analysis has been undertaken based on the laws of physics. So what does Hasselblad have to say about this classic Aldrin picture? Does it look to Jan Lundberg as though the subject was lit?
Yes, it seems like he's standing in the spotlight. And I can't explain that. That escapes me. Why? So maybe you have to find Armstrong and ask him.
Why is the center reticle not in the center of the image?
The exact answer to the question is I don't really know and haven't even bothered to go find out. And the reason is this is 30-year-old stuff. We mounted this expedition, the expeditions to the moon, almost 30 years ago. And frankly, I had a chance to look over the points that this person was making. I didn't understand them. I don't understand why we should spend the time to go off and do the research to look up, to prove to people that we went to the moon. The fact of the matter is we did go to the moon.
While noting that Brian Welch referred to one single expedition to the moon and then corrected himself, it's interesting that NASA, via its media representative, declares itself not accountable to the public for its actions. This despite the fact that NASA went to the moon for all mankind. And surely the fact that one individual spokesman claims he doesn't understand the questions asked does not in any way invalidate the demand for a proper response and the necessity for a proper response. Bill Kaysing is a science writer and was head of technical publications in the propulsion field labs in California from 1956 to 1963. He was employed by Rocketdyne, contractors to NASA who built the Saturn V rocket and the command and service module.
I was very much in on testing and edited and wrote technical reports on testing and, of course, witnessed tests.
So what is Bill Kaysing's view of what actually happened during Apollo?
As I see it, NASA and other connected agencies knew that they couldn't get to the moon and back. All right, they had to simulate it. So to do this, they went to, say, agencies like ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency in Massachusetts. They're connected with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I have worked for ARPA, and I know that they have the highest level scientists. So NASA and NSA and other assorted agencies went to MIT and said, okay, this is a super secret project, tell us how we can simulate it. To create a simulation is really not all that difficult, because if all the input comes from NASA and goes to NASA, and you knew that was the case, all Apollo communications were handled from and to NASA. So they had complete control.
Once the astronauts had been launched, it was no longer possible to verify the authenticity of any communication. In the case of major news stories here on Earth, journalists witness and comment on news events, and reports have to be confirmed before going to press. The Apollo communication links were controlled by none other than NASA itself. In these circumstances, how could we know for sure that the images from NASA were those of events that were actually occurring at that moment? Given the unique distribution method reserved for this region of Australia, was that Coke bottle incident a very discreet marker on the official record, a blow on the whistle that at the time would go undetected by Houston? What was really involved in the lunar surface photography? How would the Apollo pictures be taken by the astrophotographers?
They had a lot of practice, so they could feel what the setting was. Because once on the moon, on the lunar surface, in the dress, in the life support system, you couldn't see the camera. They couldn't bend their head that far down to see the scale. They had very bad feeling on the fingertips.
Were these thimble-tipped pressurized gloves, or rather gauntlets, actually the ones used? In the TV footage, these gauntlets look totally unpressurized and more like sturdy gardening gloves. This picture from Apollo 15 can only be described as a good example of a typical advertising pack shot. Everything is perfectly arranged to sell the product. In this instance, that product is NASA's program. We have the astronaut filled in with light, so we don't get a rather disappointing and ghastly silhouette. He's standing just adjacent to the American flag, beautifully backlit and glowing, planted so that it slightly overlaps the lem, thus leading the eye across the picture. And of course the lem just happens to be photographed in such a way that its promotional logo is towards the camera. The rover itself then slightly overlaps the lem, delivering altogether an excellently composed picture, in no way consistent with the mere snapshot of random objects. Such an excellent image would be ideal for future use as general publicity, and in fact was used subsequently for posters and postcards. This is emphatically not a casual photograph of a saluting astro colleague who just happened to be standing, as luck would have it, in the right place at the right moment. Now let's look at some more inconsistencies in the shadows present in the Apollo imagery. Here again is Apollo 11. This time it's Armstrong and Aldrin standing together. But their two shadows grow to completely different lengths. The nearer one of them moves towards the light source, the longer their shadow becomes. Such an effect has nothing to do with their relative heights and everything to do with moving to and from a superlight. Remember, the landing site was supposed to have been on flat terrain, the Sea of Tranquility. Consider carefully the difference in lengths of these two shadows. There is no evidence at all of any astronaut making a leap or a jump anywhere near a height commensurate with 1/6 g possibilities. But if they were actually simulating EVAs on Earth, they would then need help with their bulky heavyweight suits and backpacks in order to achieve the visual effect of moving around easily in lunar gravity. So enter wire supports. This is a tried and tested way of relieving weight from performers, or even flying an actor. Compare that sequence with an obvious rehearsal rig. The dangling effect is very evident. Here in this Apollo 14 footage, you can see a ping, a momentary glint. And again, run slowly. And once more. There are other examples too. This one is from Apollo 17 during the flag scene. You can see the ping at the top of the frame. And here again, from the same mission, Apollo 16, we have an astronaut who is about to get up.
Give me a hand. Okay, here we go.
Let me give you a hand, he says.
There goes bag. There goes another bag.
Look at it again. The astronaut is getting up with the wire taking the weight, relieving him of 5/6 of the Earth's gravity.
I'm going to step off the left now. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for... No, I guess you want to do it again. Okay. I'm going to step off the left now. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for...
If you have an unlimited budget, which is what the simulators had, you can do anything you want. You can create the most incredible vistas, people on Mars or Venus or planets of the nearest star. Money will buy anything, except happiness.